Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Levan and I'm very pleased to meet you in this way, and I will be even more pleased to meet you in person. Let me tell you a bit about myself. I was born and raised in France. My parents were school teachers. I did all of my schooling in France, including 12 years of university studies, but I also studied at Cambridge University in England, literature, and conducted part of my doctoral research in comparative literature at Yale University and Harvard University. That was in the early 1990s. I'm married and I have 3 children, whom I and my husband have homeschooled all the way to college. Our family moved to the United States in 2003. My husband is American and was born and raised here in Southern California, but he lived in Europe for 17 years before returning home for him in 2003 and with us. I have master's degrees in both history and literature. I strongly believe that history informs literature. A novel, a story, a poem is created in a particular context, and so one can better understand literature by replacing it in its historical context. I have always been interested in literature, in language per se, English primarily, but also classical Latin. I also studied Church Latin, ancient Greek, Spanish, which I studied extensively at school for quite a few years. And I was also curious to learn German, Norwegian, and Chinese. I actually spent a year in China. I lived there for a year and studied its language at the East China Normal University in Shanghai. I have always loved literature, not only as an academic subject, but also as a personal interest. I do come from a family of school teachers. Both my parents taught in the French educational system, and to a great extent, my parents inspired me to become a teacher. From them and from the way I was taught at school, I learned the comprehensive step-by-step method of teaching that sometimes I find absent in the way in America teaching is conducted. So this is something very, very important in my method of teaching that I have learned definitely in my schooling in France. That for a child to be fully educated and acquire mastery, one needs to go step by step, make sure that one step is mastered before we move to the next one. So I feel it's a more systematic approach than what I've encountered here, but this is maybe a generalization. My early readings of the great pedagogue Maria Montessori's writings and Jean Piaget, whom you may know, the Swiss psychologist known for his work on early child development, also deeply inspired me to become a teacher. In 1992, I became a professeur agrégé after entering the national competitive examination for service in the French public education system. The examination itself is called the agrégation, so you become professeur agrégé, and therefore you can postulate a position at the university. I did not postulate a position at the university. I taught for 2 or 3 years, public, yes, middle school and high school students. At the time when our first child was born, it is then that I and my husband decided to homeschool our children. Our most important goal was to instill a love for learning, so learning could become a lifelong pursuit. We read a lot to them. We gave them time, a lot of time to read on their own. Such time they may not have had they gone to school, especially in their early years, as the schools did not offer reading time or sessions in the way that we felt was important for their own development. Early on, I had realized that the greatest achievements of mankind, including artistic but not only, die with the individual unless they're fashioned anew in the minds of the children. In such respects, I didn't think that public schools transmitted art and culture. in a way that our children could experience and receive the broader education that we had in mind for them. And this is the primary reason why we decided to homeschool. I deeply believe that different kinds of knowledge are interconnected. For example, a great scientist reveals a level of imagination and originality that you will similarly find expressed in the mind of a great artist. I believe that in not only training the intellect, but also the senses. And this is where arts, such as language arts, because writing is a craft, have a crucial place in this development. The better a reader, the better a writer, and vice versa. They really co-nurturing experiences. A good reader is going to be able to empathize with the character's emotions, or to understand different points of view, to appreciate the mind of the writer that is at work in the creation, in the story. More broadly, reading and writing are crucial simply because language is our only means of communication. The richer, the more nuanced, the more elaborate our language is, the better we can communicate ideas, emotions, thoughts. To learn precision in language, I find very important. In any kind of occupation, it will be important. And of course, you cannot get into a top college without having developed such skills. The language is too complex to be learned mechanistically, simply through learning by rote, list after list. That is part of the training, but it cannot be reduced to that only. Maria Montessori demonstrated the child's mind is absorbent, and so we must also expose the child to the great writers, to their minds, so they can absorb, they can also learn certain complex ways of thinking, of feeling, implicitly, by absorption, by being exposed to those ways. I also treat language not only as a craft, but also as an art, aside from the practical applications. And if I want to conclude on this important topic, I believe that one has to learn different kinds of writing for different contexts. Business, formal, literary. For example, and to my dismay, I found that many students do not know the difference between formal and colloquial English. I would say the biggest one, and then we can speak about some other peripheral ones that are important as well, but they don't spend enough time reading or being read to. And so often they do not understand basic texts. This is the peripheral idea here, but it can explain why they may be not having enough time for. Because if they come back from school, they may on some form of media or another, and that is very time consuming and can replace the time that they could be using for reading on their own. They tend to be, from my own observations, oversaturated with media. And I think this is a big challenge for parents to monitor this. And unfortunately, media tend to replace the delayed and the more fulfilling gratification of active uses of the imagination. They're being given ready-made, passive forms of entertainment. Such entertainment, I believe, is exploitative because it robs the child of the natural delight of solving puzzles. And when you are absorbed in a story and in a plot, you are engaged in the process of solving a puzzle of some sort, or in playing simply a game. They're robbed of the natural delight of wondering about the world and flexing their budding intellectual abilities. So the good news is that these delights can be restored. And one of the ways to restore those delights is through reading. I also observe a lack of time and respect devoted to humanities. A great Russian writer whose works I studied once wrote that the scientist must have the imagination and proleptic abilities of an artist, while the artist must cultivate the precision and perceptive abilities of a scientist in observing the world and recapturing it in his own work of imagination. We have lost respect for knowledge that is not explicitly pragmatic or utilitarian, forgetting that all successful people are well-rounded. Doing the kind of work that I as a teacher can accomplish with my children and students, reading with the student rather than simply assigning homework. While you're reading with them, guide them in wondering about puzzles in the text rather than only grasping plots at their most basic levels. Also connecting the material to fascinating discussions linked to other intellectual inquiries. A book set in Victorian England can inspire discussions on tea time etiquette. The motivations of characters should relate to also analyzing the psychological forces at play in that particular work. The writer's biography could be enlightened and made vibrant, so the children can make these connections and enjoy them. Yes, every night we would write specifically the schedule for the next day. I have to say it was very structured, particularly the mornings. So I'm going to mostly concentrate on the early years and speak a little bit about how we did it for high school, throughout high school as well. In the early years, our time together was highly concentrated. On a typical day, we started at 8 and would finish around either noon or 2 p.m. As years went by, I needed another 1 or 2 hours in the afternoon in structured formal teaching. No homework, of course, we did all the drilling together during the lesson time. From 8 to 9, languages, Latin, French. 9 to 10, history. I followed quite closely the curriculum of a great pedagogue, influential in the homeschooling community, Susan Weisbauer. From 10 to 11, writing and grammar, and sometimes poetry memorization. From 11 to 12, science, and 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, there were variants, math. So pretty much every day we tried to implement this schedule. The rest of the day was off to pursue various artistic or scientific activities or projects. In truth, my children would spend all day long learning, whether we structured such learning formally or not. Aside from meeting the standards that I set for them academically, they had to excel in standardized tests each year. That was my gauge. I got acquainted with the California Department of Education standards, and I would make sure that when they tested at the end of the year, they would excel those. Apart from that, my children had a lot of freedom to read, to draw, to listen to symphonic, operatic literature, compose. We encouraged them to compose music as early as they could and write poetry, practice for many hours their instruments. So we needed quite a few hours in the afternoon to do that as well. All of them became professional musicians and performed weekly, monthly, from an early age on, in public. I was involved in staging and analyzing the poetry of their musical theater pieces or art songs. My son gravitated towards the sciences. He taught himself programming languages, and that took a lot of his own time. I had to make room and give him this time so he could, on his own. My husband and I have no background, no understanding of computer science. And he created award-winning startups featured in BBC News by the age of 14. So we encourage, again, all these initiatives. I hope, of course, a result of my formal instruction that he received in the science class with me, but not to the extent that he developed it at all. My daughters put on Shakespeare plays, inviting friends to also be part of the team. They created art societies among their friends. They became accomplished dancers through lessons that we would take outside, of course, of the home. All of them still have a disinterested passion for learning to this day, meaning unmotivated by strictly practical concerns, And two of my children, my daughters, have teaching positions at universities. They're 24 and 26 respectively. Now they are enjoying transmitting all this knowledge to others. It's not enough to be an excellent student to be admitted at a top university. Each successful candidate must adopt a vision statement. You probably know this. What it means by that is having a distinctive way of looking at the world, and that must be reflected in the essays. The writings my children produced, drawing from their interest in William James philosophy, or they would discuss with their father, or aesthetic preoccupations with mysticism, for example, could not be faked. They were the result of many years devoted to developing originality of thought. Their own ideas we would discuss oftentimes in our family, and would try to add to that with whatever knowledge we could inform them with, and encourage them to read further, whether it was a topic in science or in philosophy or in literature. So the child can find his own personal way of looking at the world, what they call a vision statement to make that is really reflecting him or her. For example, my daughter's interview for Princeton. She was 15 years old. She was made to recite a soliloquy from Hamlet. It happened to resonate with the interviewer. He was a lawyer and he was moved to tears. What I would say to conclude is that one has to live with great ideas for many years without necessarily having a utilitarian purpose in mind, just for the sake of appreciating what our predecessors, the great minds in our humanity have transmitted to us, and encourage children to research those great ideas and to acquaint them with them. So one day they may want to become scholars also in their own rights. Be involved. There are many forces working to corrupt the natural flexibility and creativity of a child's mind in modern society. Be involved. Counteract those forces as much as possible. Encourage every opportunity you can find, an approach to learning that is pleasurable while remaining rigorous. Because we need also to instill the love for that discipline, the love for finding the time and structuring our time, how to organize that time so we can actually accomplish those great things that we enjoy pursuing. Yeah.